Okay, welcome everybody. This is going to be the second lecture. This is Token Engineering Module 2, and thank you for all joining today. Okay, so game design meets crypto economics, designing Web3 game economies that work or that work for, the game that we are creating. And again, my name is Kwame, and I'll be your instructor. So, an overview of what we're going to go over today. It's going to be the main game loop versus the economic loop, how these two things coincide and work together in our Web3 games. The archetypes, the types of players that are going to be playing Web3 games, their, methodologies, the things that they do, the reasonings why they're there, how we can, bridge these different types of players so that there's like some cohesion. We're also going to go over some of the, core value propositions, earn, spend, invest, burn, how that loop works into our Web3 games as well. So let's take into consideration a game loop and, what is a game loop? It's something that's basically repeated by the player. A cycle of actions, they get some reward. So we have an example here of a simple game loop. The user or the player, mind you, fights. They, win. They earn some XP. They level up, they unlock some item, and then they repeat this process with some varying degree of complexity, making the game a little bit harder to keep the player engaged. Now let's look at the economic loop. So there's a flow of tokens or resources in and out of the game. And we can give a quick example of how this basically works. So the player plays the game, they earn the token, they spend this on an upgrade or some other, in-game item. That token is burnt. They receive whatever it is that they used the token for, and then we repeat that process. So this impacts the token value and retention because the user is actually, gaining the token, they're using it in game, they're burning off that token, which is making the token inside the game actually deflationary. So the different types of players that we're going to find in Web3 games, we have like four different types of players, but we can kind of use our imaginations here. So we have the achievers. They seek out goals, rewards, and progress, and that's their main reason for being in the game. We have the socializers. These are people who are, playing the game. They are, making friends. They're building relationships. They interact. They trade with other users. They collaborate. And, these are like some of the best players that you can get. You have the investors. So these are the people who are there for more of a monetary reasoning. They have invested in, building up their characters, building things out, and, maybe through some, user-generated content type of mechanism, they are, selling items, but they're more considered as investors. And then you have the strategists, the min-max and optimizing the system. They're trying to extract out value from the game. And all these four different types of players are going to be in Web 2 settings and Web 3 settings. But we're going to find that there is a different divide when we take this into account from a Web 2 game to a Web 3 game. But I digress. So, why player types matter in our Web3 games? Like every type interacts with the game economy differently. So, we have players that are jumping into the game, and we have these four defined player types that we have, gone over, but they all are playing the same game but they have different reasonings for playing the game, if that makes sense, right? So poorly balanced economies only serve one type. And in the last slide, we defined that there is four types of these players in our game, and we need to make sure that the game economy and the game balances out pretty fairly to all of these four types of players that we defined. And balanced economies reward all behaviors, um, you know, and that's what we're trying to do. We know that we have four different types of players that are going to be in our Web3 games, but we also need to make sure that these four different types of players are treated the same in our games. So balancing out this game economy is just as important as having a fun game. And that's one thing that we really need to define. And game developers that are coming from Web 2 to Web 3, they usually always define it as, well, we're just going to create a really fun game and the players will come. And that is true. Like, if the game isn't fun, then these other things that we kind of add on to these Web3 game mechanics will only hold a player for so long. But when you're defining or building a Web3 game, you need to have this balanced economy to balance out these four distinct types of players that are going to be playing your game. So, core economic actions is the earn. So, we have quests, battles, and trading. We have the spend, where we have our items, upgrade different cosmetics, upgrading, things to our NFTs, shoes, armor, things like that. We have the investors, people who are going to gain the in-game token. They're going to, stake it. They may even lend it out, contribute it to a decentralized autonomous organization, or just for, governance and things like that. And then we have the burning mechanism where there may be some like a payment tax. There might be just you buy a in-game item and then you burn that token, some gamble, some exit, all these different things. So these are the core economic actions that you're going to have in Web3 games. Now, let's look at this loop in harmony. So we need to align our game loop with the economic loop. So the game is kind of like the Web 2 part. Like, this is what is fun. This is the shiny stuff. This is the sizzle reel. These are all these different things. And then you have the economic loop. And every game has an economy. As we've discussed in the last lecture, that if your game doesn't have an economy, it's not going to be fun. It might be pleasing to the eye, but it's not going to be fun. It's not going to engage the player, and it's not going to give the player the sense of urgency in order to, gain these tokens or gain these specific items and to play longer. Now, this keeps players engaged and keeps the economy healthy. We are looking at this from the sense of that we have an economy in the game that is balancing why players are doing specific things, but we also need to keep this balance. And we were talking about like inflation and having maybe too many tokens in the game or having too less of tokens in the game and keeping it in this threshold. So, great examples of ways that we can do this is daily quests, right? We have the players engaged to jump in the game each day to do X amount of things. They earn XP, they might earn tokens, etc. They spend on an upgrade, it improves their gameplay, and now we have a loop, right? There's a reason why these four distinct player types are doing said things in order to extract out the specific value that they want from our games. Warning signs of bad loops. So we've seen some ways that we can add in these incentive mechanisms to make the game fun and to make the core game loop and the core economic loop run in synergy. But how can we define a bad loop? So one is unlimited earning. So hyperinflation in our game. And if a token in your game does not have a cap, and it's very likely that the game that you're making might not have a cap because you can't take into consideration that you might have millions of players or 1,000 players or no players, right? No burn sinks, so token oversupply. Personally, if you're going to have a token in your game that doesn't have a cap, then you need to have a burning mechanism. And what do we mean by that? Well, in the prior slides, we set an example of a player that gets into the game, they earn some tokens, and then they purchase a specific item. Now, the item that they pick or want to buy might be 50 tokens. So instead of those 50 tokens going back into the economy, those 50 tokens that the player used to buy a specific item is burnt. And so they're no longer in circulation. The other part, this happens usually in the early stages of games, which is fine if that is a part of the game mechanic or the reason for bringing in early adopters and rewarding them. This is fine, but you need to have some cap at some point where the over incentivized components to bring in early adopters is weaned down as the player dynamic grows. So that's the end of this lecture. In our next one, we're going to look at the types of tokens that are in Web3 games, how we can utilize the game that we currently have and start picking out like which parts work well in our game economy. We're going to look at currency, utility, governance tokens, dual token versus single token models. And I really hope that you enjoyed this lecture as much as I've put it together. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.